Shalom, everyone. Thank you again for watching my videos. I hope that you all find value in the information that I will continue to bring forward. But for today, my topic that I will be going over will be how the Israelites actually first started off in Egypt. Now, there are a lot of people who study Egyptology that suggest that there is no evidence of historical records other than the Bible that place Israelites in Egypt. Um, Well, today we're actually going to go back and look and see how the Israelites actually came into Egypt and how it corresponds with Egyptian history. We're going to find out that the Israelites actually ruled in Egypt for a time. In fact, the Israelites are the reason that why Egypt became a great nation in the first place. Most people already know that Jacob was the promised son of Isaac and that Jacob's name was changed to Israel. We know that Jacob/Israel had 12 sons. These 12 sons are the 12 tribes of Israel. Now let's go back into the story and see about his youngest son, Joseph. We're going to start off by reading Genesis chapter 37, verses 3 through 5. It reads, Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren, and they hated him yet once more. Okay, so all the sons of Jacob were actually jealous of Joseph because their father loved him the most. On top of that, Joseph actually had a vision. And in this vision, he saw his father and his brothers bowing down to him. So when Joseph shared this dream with his brothers, their hatred for him grew even more. And then they plotted to kill him. I'm going to move on to Genesis 37, verse 23 through 28. It reads, And it came to pass, when Joseph was coming to his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. They took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. They sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead, with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother, and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianite merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. So instead of killing Joseph, his brothers actually ended up selling him into slavery in Egypt. Joseph was only about 17 years old at the time. The Most High stayed with Joseph while he was in Egypt, and still gave him power to see and understand dreams. About 13 years goes by, and the Pharaoh at this time had a dream that no one could interpret except Joseph. Joseph explained to the Pharaoh that that for 7 years the land of Egypt would do extremely well when it came to harvesting grain and for food. But after that, a famine would come over Egypt that would also last for another 7 years. So Joseph suggested that the Pharaoh store up food for the first 7 years to prepare all of Egypt to survive the famine. By doing this, Egypt actually became a very rich nation. I'm going to read from Genesis chapter 41, verses 39 through 43. It reads, And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, For as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according to thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. So after being in servitude for 13 years, Joseph becomes the ruler of all of Egypt. At least 8 more years passed by before Joseph's brothers actually traveled back to Egypt. So it had been around 22 years since Joseph's brothers had sold him into slavery. and they had no idea that Joseph had now become the ruler of all Egypt. I'm going to jump down to Genesis chapter 42, verses 1 through 8. It reads, Now, when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, Why do ye look upon another? And he said, Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get thee down hither, and buy from us from thence, that we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, Lest peradventure mischief befall him. And the sons of Israel came to buy corn amongst them that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. And Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spoke roughly unto them, and said unto them, Whence come ye? And they said, From the land of Canaan, to buy food. And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew not him. So now Joseph's brothers come to Egypt for food, but they didn't recognize their own brother. After spending more than 2 decades in Egypt, Joseph looked, talked, and acted like an Egyptian. Now even more so because he had the appearance of an Egyptian king. Joseph initially did not let his brothers know who he was, but when he did, he instructed them to bring their father Jacob and all his possessions to the land of Goshen. I'm going to jump down to Genesis chapter 46, verses 2 through 6. It reads, And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will surely bring thee up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. And Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, and their little ones, and their wives, in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And they took their cattle and their goods, which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all his seed with him. So this is how the nation of Israel came into the land of Egypt. I'm going to go down to Genesis chapter 46, verses 26 through 28. It reads, All the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins besides Jacob's sons' wives, all the souls were 66. And the sons of Joseph, which were born in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70. And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph, to direct his face unto Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. So in total, there were 70 Israelites that lived in the land of Goshen, which was considered the lower part of Egypt. Today, the land of Goshen is located in Cairo or Alexandria. Now I'm going to move on to Genesis chapter 46, verses 31 through 34. It reads, And Joseph said unto his brethren, and unto his father's house, I will go up, and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, My brethren and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are come unto me. And the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle. And they have brought their flocks and their herds, and all that they have. And it shall come to pass when the Pharaoh shall call you, and shall say, What is your occupation? Then ye shall say, Thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth, and even until now. But we and also our fathers, that may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. So when Joseph met his brothers in the land of Goshen, he instructed them to tell Pharaoh that they were all shepherds. In Egyptian culture, being a shepherd was considered a low position and ridiculed by most Egyptians. Genesis chapter 47, verses 5 through 11 reads, And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, Thy father and thy brethren came unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father, and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, How old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers, and the days of their pilgrimage. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and went out from before Pharaoh. And Joseph placed his father and his brethren, and gave them possession in the land of Egypt, and in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. So after Jacob met Pharaoh, Joseph gave his brothers the land of Goshen, also known as the land of Ramesses, and made them kings in this land. After this, the nation of Israel continued to grow and multiply in Egypt. This feared some, if not many, Egyptians. And after Joseph and all of his brothers died, the next Pharaoh started to force the Israelites out of Egypt. Now I'm going to jump to Exodus chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. It reads, Now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls. For Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren in that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceedingly great. And the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us dwell wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass, that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters, and afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasures in cities, Pithom and Ramesses. So, according to biblical history, the Israelites ruled and multiplied in Egypt during the time of Joseph. During the time that Joseph became the overseer of Egypt around 1885 BC. It wasn't until after the death of Joseph and his generation that a new king came into power in order to oppress the Israelites around 1600 BC. Now, let's link this to Egyptian history. We know that the pharaoh during Joseph's rule was named Magron. The Egyptians, however, called him Timothus IV and Amenhotep III. We're going to read from the book of Jasher, and we will see that Joseph actually ruled during the reign of two different Magrons. The Magron that originally put Joseph in power, and then Magron's son, who Joseph basically became a father to. The book of Jasher, chapter 58, verses 2 through 6 reads, And Pharaoh commanded Joseph before his death to be a father to his son Magron, and that Magron should be under the care of Joseph, and under his counsel. And all Egypt consented to this thing, that Joseph should be king over them. For all the Egyptians loved Joseph. As of hereof, only Magron the son of Pharaoh sat upon his father's throne. And he became king in those days, in his father's stead. Magron was 41 years old when he began to reign, and 40 years he reigned in Egypt. And all Egypt called his name Pharaoh, after the name of his father, as it was custom to do in Egypt, to every king that reigned over them. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh reigned in his father's stead, he placed the laws of Egypt and all the affairs of the government in the hand of Joseph, and his father, as his father commanded him. And Joseph became king over Egypt, for he superintended over all Egypt, and all Egypt was under his care and under his counsel. For all Egypt inclined to Joseph after the death of Pharaoh. They loved him exceedingly to reign over him. Now, in Egyptian history, there is no official record of Hebrews ever being in Egypt. But around 300 BC, an Egyptian historian named Manetho worked for the Greek pharaoh named Ptolemy I, or Soter. In his records, Manetho does give an account of a race of people of non-Egyptian descent that did in fact rule in Egypt. These people are referred to as Hyksos. The Hebrew historian Josephus, however, points out that these people referred to as Hyksos were actually the Hebrew Israelites. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's very long, but I will read some key points. So I'm going to read from the complete works of Josephus. This is in Flavius Josephus against Apion, Book 1, paragraph 14 reads, I shall begin with the writings of the Egyptians, not indeed of those that have written in the Egyptian language, which is impossible for me to do. But Manetho was a man who was by birth an Egyptian. Yet had he made himself master of the Greek learning, as it is very evident, for he wrote the history of his own country in the Greek tongue, by translating it, as he saith himself, out of their sacred records. And he also finds great fault with Herodotus for his ignorance and false relations in Egyptian affairs. Now this Manetho, in the second book of his Egyptian history, writes concerning us in the following manner. I will set down his very words as if I were going to bring the very man himself into a court for a witness. See, Josephus was a well-known Hebrew Israelite historian who lived around 600 AD. He used the writings of Manetho to prove Hebrew history and show the errors in some cases. Further down it reads, and these 6 were the first rulers among them, who were all along making war with the Egyptians, and were very desirous gradually to destroy them to the very roots. This whole nation was styled Hyksos, that is, Shepard Kings. For the first syllable, Hyk, according to the sacred dialect, denotes a king, as is Sos, a shepherd. But this, according to the ordinary dialect of these, is compounded Hyksos. But some say that these people were Arabians. Now, as we read in the Bible, we know that the shepherds that became rulers in Egypt were the Israelites. Josephus is pointing this out. It goes on to read, these people who have before named kings and called shepherds also their descendants, as he says, kept possession in Egypt 511 years. After these, he says, that the kings of Thebes and other parts of Egypt made an insurrection against the shepherds, and that through a terrible and long war was made between them. He says further, that under a king whose name was Alesigesamas, the shepherds were subdued by him, and were indeed driven out to other parts of Egypt, but were shut up in a place that contained 10,000 acres. This place was named Avaris. So, Manetho's writings explain that the shepherd kings ruled for hundreds of years in Egypt, and specifically stayed in a city in Egypt called Avaris. It's interesting to note that Avaris is literally in the middle of the land of Goshen. Goshen is a land that was given to the Israelites, like we mentioned earlier in the Bible. It goes on to read, they came to a composition with them, that they should leave Egypt, and go without any harm to be done to them, whithersoever they would, and that after this composition was made, they went away with their whole families and effects, not fewer in number than 240,000, and took their journey from Egypt through the wilderness for Syria. But as they were in fear of the Assyrians, who had then dominion over Asia, they built a city in that country, which is now called Judea, and that large enough to contain this great number of men, and called it Jerusalem. So Manetho states that the Hyksos agreed to leave Egypt and then ended up settling in Jerusalem. Again, it's very ironic that the Israelites also ended up settling in Jerusalem. Most archaeologists and historians claim that the Hyksos were a mix of possibly either West Asian or Arab people. While the term Asiatic is often used to describe the Hyksos, the term Asiatic was used for any people that were native to areas east of Egypt. The Israelites migrated into Egypt from the land of Canaan, which is east of Egypt. This, however, does not mean that they were Asian in descent, like the term Asiatic may suggest. Through the multiple similarities and understandings of biblical history, it is clear that the Gentiles have attempted to hide and distort the existence of the Israelites from history. They have manipulated timelines and changed the names, all in efforts to hide the truth. I'm going to read from Psalms chapter 83, verse 1 through 5. It reads, Keep not thy silence, O God. Hold not thy peace. Be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up thy head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, and let the name of Israel be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. So the truth is that Israelites were once kings in Egypt. And during this time period, which is now coined the Hyksos period, is a time when Egypt thrived and achieved much of its technical and cultural advances over the other nations. Now there is obviously much more to this story, but the key fact is that Israelites started off as a great and powerful nation or people in Egypt. And then eventually they became scattered, specifically starting off in Jerusalem. The truth about Israelites' history has attempted to be hidden from us, but the truth is there if we look. I urge everyone to study more on their own and always to remember to seek the truth. Thank you again for watching and subscribing to my page. Shalom.